Yellowstone supervolcano and USGS terrifying animation of how the 7.5 magnitude earthquake unleashed on Yellowstone National Park. Now, we've been having recent earthquakes, which are pretty big. As you can see here, the section goes through Baja, Utah into Yellowstone. This is a mantle plume of magma. The western arm goes into the west coast, San Andreas and Walker Lane fault system. And the east part goes through Baja, Utah, and Yellowstone. And of course, the area of Idaho. It's very shallow in that area of Yellowstone and Idaho. And this is where we've had the recent quakes in the area of the craters of the moon, where about 10 years ago, the geologists claimed that if another volcano erupts in Idaho, it would be right there. And this is where we've been having our quake swarm, the 6.5 that came out of nowhere, after the Salt Lake City 5.7 that came out of nowhere, and the 5 magnitude in northwest Texas that came out of nowhere. And we're having quake swarms in all of those three areas. Now, something must be going on there, logically, because they are not small earthquakes. 6.5 was felt 500 miles away, and it was picked up by seismographs from what the heliplots show, 3,500 miles away. And obviously, Yellowstone, which was right next to it, was shaken by this 6.5 in Idaho. There was an earthquake in Yellowstone 60 years ago, 1959, around midnight of August 17, of a magnitude 7.5. And Yellowstone, of course, was shaken by that. They say it went up more than 20 feet, more than 60 years ago. And the animation here by Yellowstone National Park Services shows us what's happened. The Yellowstone caldera, which is the first ever U.S. national park, gets its name because of as a supervolcano. It's the second largest supervolcano in the earth. And it has had 3 super eruptions in the past 2 million years, 2.1 million years ago, 1.3 million years ago, and 640,000 years ago. And it's called a supervolcano because it has the ability to inflict a disaster on a worldwide level. It's in the northwest part of Wyoming and lapping over to Montana and Idaho. And the supervolcano is always monitored by the U.S. Geological Survey, Yellowstone Volcano Observatory, for signs that any type of an eruption may be on its way, especially a super eruption. Now, while most of the incidents are nowhere near levels needed to trigger such an eruption, the 1959 Hebgen Lake earthquake that took place August 17 was a different story. 7.3, 7.5, just around there. The magnitude quake caused massive damage, including, as we said, an uplift of 20 feet. And in 2012, the U.S. Forest Service shared video detailing the traumatic series of events and how that earthquake changed the landscape of Yellowstone. It even created what we call Quake Lake. It was just before midnight, August 17, and it was a terrifying force that unleashed a landslide from a part of the mountain, closing up a river and blocking it and causing a lake. The computer animation shows the sequence of events that happened under the darkness of night. First, at the epicenter of the quake, the Red Canyon and Hebgen Lake fault lines cracked and they dropped 20 feet or more. 3 giant scarps ripped through the Madison River Canyon, and the documentary also explains the destruction of some campsites. And within seconds, the earthquake dealt its most damaging blow. At the point where the canyon drops into the plains, a massive block of canyon sheared off, sliding into the Madison River and halfway up the opposite canyon wall. So it blocked off the river. The section of rock 3/4 of a mile hit the river like a platter dropping into a pan, it says, and the landslide displaced water in every direction instantly, and the slide dammed the river, and water began to build up behind the slide, forming Earthquake Lake, or Quake Lake. And at the same time this was happening, upstream another disaster, Hebgen Lake, created it's a man-made lake because of the Hebgen Dam that was created in 1915, was sloshing over its banks like water in a pail because of the earthquake, and the landslide caused huge amounts of water to saturate anyone there. Series continued that when the north side of the lake dropped some 20 feet, huge waves called seiches were formed. They overtopped the dam, washing into the river downstream. And the first panic reports of the canyon, including the news that Hebgen Dam had failed, but it didn't, thank goodness. Now, if true, the massive wall of water would have blown out the side down the river and wreaked havoc on downstream communities, but that didn't happen, thank goodness. And the documentary describes how the sheer panic of people trying to escape, Hebgen Lake earthquake struck on a calm, clear, moonlit night at the peak of a tourist season in Yellowstone in August, as we know. So as Earthquake Lake began filling the road that the people had driven on, it was of course not there anymore, and the rock had cracked into pieces. But let's go and look at the part of that simulation. It's a scenario, it's an animation, it's not the real thing, it's an animation. And let's take a look at it. This is by Yellowstone National Park Service.
But just before midnight on August 17th, 1959, one of nature's most terrifying forces was unleashed in this narrow canyon. An earthquake, measuring 7.5 on the Richter scale, jolted the ground. At the time, it was the fourth strongest quake ever recorded in the United States. This computer animation shows the sequence of events that happened under the cover of darkness. First, at the epicenter of the quake, the Red Canyon and Hebgen Lake fault lines cracked and dropped 20 feet or more. 3 giant scarps ripped through the Madison River Canyon. Within seconds, the earthquake dealt its most damaging blow. Just at the point where the canyon drops into the plains, a massive block of canyon wall sheared off and slid with astonishing speed and force into the Madison River and halfway up the opposite canyon wall. The section of rock, 3/4 mile wide, hit the river like a platter dropping into a pan of water. The landslide displaced water in every direction. Instantly, the slide dammed the river, and water began to build up behind the slide, forming Earthquake Lake. At the same time this was happening, upstream another disaster was in the making. Hebgen Lake, created in 1915 when the Hebgen Dam was built, was sloshing over its banks like water in a pail. When the north side of the lake dropped some 20 feet, huge waves called seiches were formed. They overtopped the dam, washing into the river downstream.
By Callum Hoare, Express UK. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition, and the community around our church. Thank you.